The integumentary system is the skin and its derivatives. So this means that not only does it include the skin, it also includes the sweat and the oil glands. It includes hair as well as nails. And as we're going to learn in this chapter, the hair and the nails really are modifications of the epidermis. So the main parts of the integumentary system is the epidermis, and you learned about this tissue in chapter 4. Also includes the underlying dermis. And also deep to the dermis is the subcutaneous tissue, which is also called the hypodermis. And sometimes in the hospital this is abbreviated as sub-Q, so giving a shot sub-Q would be administering the shot in the hypodermis. And this hypodermis is not always considered part of the skin, strictly speaking. It's also referred to as the superficial fascia. And you'll learn more about fascia in a subsequent chapter when we get to the muscles. But it's a tough connective tissue wrapping of the skeletal muscles. The epidermis, recall, is all epithelial cells, whereas the dermis is connective tissue. So by this definition, since we have two or more tissues, the skin is considered an organ. And the skin has the largest surface area of our entire body. It actually makes up 7% of the total body weight, so a huge, huge amount. So there's a lot of surface area here, which is going to be important for protecting us, for absorption of molecules. If we look at the word integument itself, it kind of looks like the word integrity, and that's one of its major functions, is it maintains our integrity. It also is a sort of built-in raincoat, so it acts as a waterproofing layer for our body. And we're going to go into the layers of the epidermis more in depth, but I want to draw your attention to figure 5.1, which is the skin structure. And you should know the different parts of the skin structure, be able to label this and describe what the various roles of these areas are. So I'll be referring back to this slide, but notice we have the epidermis, which again is all epithelial cells. We have the dermis, which is connective tissue, and there are really two different layers of the dermis, which we'll talk about, called the papillary layer, the more superficial layer, and the reticular layer. The papillary layer makes up approximately 20% of the thickness of the dermis, and the reticular layer is the remaining 80% of the dermis. So the epidermis is keratinized, stratified, squamous epithelium. So it's many, many layers, and it's also going to have keratinocytes that are going to be producing this tough fibrous protein, which we call keratin. And so these are some of the major cells that you need to be aware of in the epidermis. There's 4 major ones. And the keratinocytes, as I mentioned, are going to produce keratin. And the keratin is a tough, fibrous protein. Back in chapter 2, you learned that there were 2 major types of protein. There were fibrous proteins and also globular proteins. Now these cells are very tightly held together by desmosomes, and recall from chapter 3 that the desmosomes are going to prevent ripping apart of these cells. And these cells are going to be produced in the deepest part of the epidermis, which is called the stratum basal, which we'll talk about next. And we actually get a whole new layer of skin, a new epidermis, every 25 to 45 days. And so what the cells that you see, the keratinocytes that you see that are most superficial, so that you see on a person's surface, are actually going to be dead keratinocytes. Now the melanocytes, as you would guess, produce the melanin pigment. And when this melanin builds up, it is stored in little vacuoles, which we call melanosomes. So these melanosomes are going to store the melanin. And the important thing about this pigment is that this pigment is going to protect or shield our nucleus from UV radiation, which is very important. As you know, the DNA is found in the nucleus, and it's very important that that DNA be shielded from damaging ultraviolet rays. The next cell that we have is called a dendritic cell. It's also called a Langerhans cell, and the Langerhans cell was named after a German scientist. You should also be able to recognize this name. But the dendritic cells also are sort of a part of our immune system that is present in the epidermis. And the reason this is important is because there's no blood vessels that are in the epidermis. Remember, the epithelial tissue, as you'll learn in chapter 4, is avascular. So there's no way for the blood flow to reach it. So in this case, the dendritic cells, the Langerhans cells, are really going to help to protect against foreign invaders. So they're the resident immune system that would be present. And then the last cell that we have is called the tactile cells. We also call them Merkel cells. And these Merkel cells can be found on the epidermis dermal junction. So if this represents the deepest layer of the epidermis, and right just directly deep to it would be the dermis. So directly deep to in this area would be the dermis. Right at this junction would be where we'd find these Merkel cells, these tactile cells. And they are important for sensory reception, for touch. So they are really essentially nerve endings, sensory receptors. So our next slide now is showing the layers of the epidermis here. And this slide, this particular slide, is showing thin skin. Now when we think of thin skin, we're referring to everywhere in the body except the palms of the hands, the fingertips, and also the soles of our feet. So everywhere except these areas are going to have these 4 different layers of skin. The stratum corneum, the stratum granulosum, the stratum spinosum, and the stratum basal. And this is the figure that you have in your textbook. It's figure 5.2. And we're going to start with the stratum basal first, which is the first one that's listed in your textbook. So we're going to start from the deepest layer. And so this deepest layer would be beginning at the epidermis dermal junction. So it's the deepest layer of the epidermis. It's only 1 layer thick. So we see these stratum basal cells down here that are going to be directly superficial to the dermis. They almost look like corrugated cardboard, if you will, or if you think about those Ruffles potato chips. But the most important thing that occurs in the stratum basal is that there is rapid mitosis. There's rapid dividing. And so for that reason, this layer is also called the stratum germinativum. It's S-T-R-A-T-U-M, but germinativum, which is referring to germinate or to grow. So it's the germinating layer, the stratum germinativum. And recall that this is where we find primarily the dendritic cells, the tactile or the Merkel cells, and you can see those labeled right here, the Merkel cells. And there are melanocytes as well. And occasionally there's going to be dendritic cells, but some of the dendritic cells can also be found a little more superficial, as you see on the right-hand side of the diagram that's in front of you. So the stratum spinosum is going to be the next more superficial layer. And in this case, we have intermediate filaments that are going to be produced, which kind of gives this the spiky appearance that it has. So, for example, you see intermediate filaments, little proteins that are found here. Then the stratum granulosum is going to be where the process of keratinization begins. So where the keratin is eventually produced. The other important thing that we see here are these water-resistant glycolipids. So water-resistant glycolipids. And the reason these are important because this is going to give the skin the ability to resist against excess water. So it gives the skin the ability to kind of act like a raincoat. The most superficial layer then that we see is going to be the stratum corneum. And in this case, this is where we're going to find all dead cells. And this is where it's going to be thickest, especially in the palms and the fingertips and the soles. So the stratum corneum is going to account for about 3/4 of the entire epidermis. So if we look on the figure to the left of this slide, you can see a very large area is all the stratum corneum. And we have stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and then stratum basal. This layer of the stratum corneum, these epithelial cells are constantly shedding off. And they're what we think of as dander. The average person is actually losing about 50,000 dead cells every minute. So 40 pounds or so of skin flakes their entire lifetime. And this is what the dust mites like so much that we shed. So the layer that is actually only going to be found in thick skin is one that's called the stratum lucidum. And the stratum lucidum is a very light layer. You don't see it in this particular layer here. And it's listed in your textbook. It's described as the clear layer. And it's 2 or 3 rows of clear, flat, and dead keratinocytes. And there's a little memory trick, a little mnemonic to help you remember these 5 layers that are in thick skin in order. And the mnemonic would be, come, let's get sunburned. So on the test, you're going to need to be able to name these in order. And again, if it's not thick skin, so if it's not located in the palms, the soles, or the fingertips, it doesn't have this additional layer right here. So there's the stratum corneum, which would be the most superficial. Remember, you need to use stratum before the word. Then there's the lucidum, which is only in thick skin. There's the granulosum. There's the spinosum. And there's also then the basal layer. So these are the 5 layers in thick skin that you should know. Now the dermis is the second major region of the skin. It's very strong, flexible, connective tissue. It has all of the major cells that we would expect in connective tissue. Fibroblasts, the macrophages, mast cells, white blood cells. There is a blood supply that's in the dermis. It's a rich supply of blood vessels as well as lymphatic vessels, as well as nerve fibers. And it can be divided into these 2 different layers, the papillary region and the reticular region. The papillary layer, it's important to know that it is areolar connective tissue, which is quite different than the reticular layer. The reticular layer, which is again about 80% of the thickness of the dermis, the papillary layer is about 20%. The reticular layer is going to be dense irregular connective tissue. And this is going to be very important for its function. So dense, irregular connective tissue. The most superficial region of the papillary layer is going to be where we find the dermal papillae. And the dermal papillae are the ridges that contain the capillary loops, as well as the Meissner's corpuscles. And the Meissner's corpuscles, as we'll learn in the next mini lecture, are specific nerve receptors. So they're different than the tactile receptors, which are found in the epidermis. And there's also some free nerve endings, which are a little different as well. But the superior surface is this peg-like appearance of dermal papillae. If we go to the last slide, this would be an example of the dermal papillae that you see here. And these dermal papillae are all going to be in different patterns. For example, in the palms of our hands, the dermal papillae are actually going to be responsible for different ridges that we call friction ridges, as you can see shown here. These friction ridges are going to enhance the ability of our fingers and feet to grip something. And these are all genetically determined, these friction ridges. And because there's a different design of these friction ridges, there's going to be the sweat pores that you see here from the sweat glands. The sweat that is released is going to leave an identification, which are, of course, our fingerprints. And so our fingerprints are genetically determined. Everybody's fingerprints are going to be different. And so what some criminals actually do is they'll use acid to get rid of these dermal ridges, and consequently they're not going to have these fingerprints then to show up in some sort of database. So the papillary region, again, is the areolar connective tissue. It has collagen and elastic fibers, but this specific type of tissue, again, is going to provide more flexibility or more give than the reticular region. The reticular region, since it's dense, irregular connective tissue, there's more collagen. The collagen is going in different directions and allows for much less of this flexibility, much less of this give that the papillary region has. So the reticular layer is, again, the thickest part of the dermis, and it's going to be where we have lots of collagen fibers that are going to be running in different directions, different planes, because, again, it is the dense, irregular connective tissue. And so what you can actually observe is the separation or the less dense ridges that are between these bundles. These are called cleavage lines or tension lines. And that's what you see in this top picture here. So all of these lines are cleavage lines. And one of the reasons that these are very important is they're important for plastic surgeons, for example. It's important that a cut, an incision, is made parallel to these lines. And this is going to result in less scarring. So that's the reason that a person their dermis can heal much more quickly then, in that case. The third type of markings that is present in the dermis is what's called the flexure lines. And the flexure lines are also called dermal folds, and they occur near these joints. And that's what you see in this bottom picture here. So since the skin can't slide easily to accommodate joint movement, these dermal folds and deep skin creases are going to provide the skin with that ability to be able to fold near these joints. Extreme stretching of the skin, for example, can result in stretch marks, as you're well aware. Some of you are well aware of. We all have these. And then there's also blisters, which can occur. A blister is going to result when there is a fluid-filled pocket, and this fluid will be found between the dermis and the epidermis. So our next slide is showing the hypodermis, and there's not too much we need to know about the hypodermis. Your book doesn't talk too much about the hypodermis, but the hypodermis again is the subcutaneous layer to the skin. It's not usually considered part of the skin, but the hypodermis in this case would actually be this region on this model where we find adipose tissue. So it's important to remember that it is containing a type of connective tissue, but it's different than the dermis. In this view that you see to your left here, this is actually showing the dermal papillae. So we don't actually see the hypodermis in this view, but it usually mostly contains adipose tissue. There could be some areolar connective tissue. We know this is the packing material that's found in a lot of other parts of our body, but it's the subcutaneous layer. And sometimes this is important, especially for skin color. If we think about keratin, for example, keratin is the yellow to orange pigments, and we can see it a lot of times in the palms of our hands and the soles of our feet, because it will tend to accumulate in the fatty tissue of the hypodermis. The pinkish hue of our skin is going to be due to hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is the protein that's in red blood cells that transports oxygen. So we could see if somebody has a reddish hue to them, and this would be called erythema. Erythema could result from such things as embarrassment, high blood pressure, fever, inflammation. Or the opposite of erythema would be cyanosis. And cyanosis means a bluish tint to the skin, and this could result in lack of oxygen being transported. Then there's also the melanin. Melanin, as I mentioned earlier, was produced by the melanocytes, and this is what is responsible for our skin color. It's interesting that all humans have the same amount of melanocytes, but humans can have a difference in skin color due to the kind and the amount of melanin that is actually produced by the melanocytes. Freckles and moles are going to be high concentrations of melanin, local accumulations of melanin. And some other homeostatic imbalances that you should be aware of are things like pallor or blanching. And blanching is usually due to low blood pressure or fear or anger. So if you say that somebody might look like a ghost, they might look pale, could be due to such things as anemia or low blood pressure. And there's also jaundice, which is another homeostatic imbalance that could be seen in the skin. A lot of times this is due to a liver disorder, so there are yellow bile pigments that will build up in the bloodstream that could account for this. The other one would be black and blue marks, which would be bruises from blood swelling, and then another one would be bronzing, which could result from a metallic appearance of the skin assigned to an endocrine disorder called Addison's disease, or maybe some other steroid problems.